Hello and welcome back to the Fat Boss Guide to Ashara on Mythic. Nah, just kidding. Hey guys, this is Titan. This morning at 6 AM did some raid testing for 2 of the new Mythic bosses coming out. Most of the group is from Big Dumb Guilds. I've cut out comms to respect their privacy. I didn't really have time to set up many keybinds or add-ons or weak auras for this, so you can see me do something as embarrassing as click wing. I'm just going to show you 1 or 2 of the longer pulls we did on each of the 2 bosses and describe the mechanics we encountered. Both bosses were a bit overtuned for testing purposes, so we didn't make it too far into either. Do note that our neck levels were 60 for this fight, which meant that we could use 1 major essence and 1 minor essence. Okay, so this raid is Eternal Palace. It's the new raid coming out in patch 8.2. The first boss that we tested is the first boss of the raid, called Abyssal Commander Sivara. For this first fight, the raid is split up into blue people and green people. The main mechanic of the fight is that if a player from one side runs too close to a player of the other side, then both players get an unstable mixture debuff for a few seconds that deals raid-wide damage. If you're blue side or the ice side, you gain stacks if you stop moving, and eventually freeze if you stay still for too long. On the green side, you gain stacks if you move, and eventually are CC'd if you move too much, kinda like the last boss in Toldagor. Periodically, a couple players from each group will get an overflow buff on them that causes them to drop a blue or green puddle based on their debuff. Both sides give a stacking debuff, and you clear stacks by running into the opposite color's pool. So this gives you the raid-wide damage debuff, but it does reset your stacks. We were clearing around 5 stacks on blue side and 3 or 4 on green, just because green was hitting a lot harder. There is also a mechanic called inversion, that happens a couple times during the fight, and it swaps the colors for some players. The boss does a frontal that splits damage, so that needs to be soaked by multiple people. And lastly, the boss shoots out spears, 1 of each color, and they need to be intercepted by someone of the same color. My impression of this fight is that different guilds will have to figure out different ways to effectively split their comps. Because players need to reset their stacks in an opposite color pool, there will probably be a few different ways you can do this. So you could have 1 player from each side drop their first pool on the opposite side, and then that side can use that as their stack reset point. Or you can separate melee and ranged and have melee or ranged stack on the opposite color side, so then they can just reset on their own side throughout the fight. But then you end up overrun with pools kind of no matter what strat you do, so I'm sure there will be different ways to deal with that. The green side was also very overtuned, and the debuff was doing insane damage, a lot more than the ice side was, so it'll be interesting to see if that makes it to live. Overall, interesting and challenging first fight. The second fight is Lady Ashvane. This fight's fucking mental, man. It's a huge step up in difficulty from the first boss. So this fight alternates between phase 1 and phase 2. The boss has a really big absorb shield on it, and you trigger phase 2 by burning through that shield. So in phase 1, there are large areas on the ground that gradually become covered in coral, which inflicts damage when you stand in it. Corals also generate waves that look like bubbles, and they restore her shield by up to 10% if they reach the boss. Small ones require 1 person to soak and give 1 stack of a debuff, and the big wave, which only happens on Mythic, requires 3 people or 3 different stacks to soak. You can get multiple stacks if you soak multiple waves. The first big issue here is that the debuffs don't go away. They're with you for the entire fight, and they do massive damage. I'm not sure whether that's intentional or not, but the healing requirements were massive on this fight. There's also some other shit on the floor called upsurge, which are pools of water that spawn under players' feet and knock them into the air if you're standing on them. It helps to have a tight melee stack to minimize the space that this takes up, because there's not much real estate during this fight. There's a lot of the floor that gets taken up pretty quick. There's another debuff that goes out as well called Briny Bubble. So 3 players get targeted, it forms a circle around them, and after a few seconds all players in that circle are encased in a bubble and they need to be DPS'd out by the other players. Phase 2 I still don't fully understand. Basically there are 3 sets of 2 players that get a mark above their head. After 8 seconds, both players take damage, and any coral growth between those 2 players gets destroyed. So this is one of the most important parts of the fight, because corals regenerate those waves that need to be soaked, and any time one of those waves hits the boss, it heals their shield by up to 10%. After the coral is destroyed, little circles appear that also need to be soaked, and if they're not, they form more coral. Briny Bubble and Upsurge are also going out during this phase, and as this is the phase where there's no absorb shield, most of the boss damage needs to be sunk in during phase 2. When Lady Ashvane regenerates her shield, it grows back 150% times stronger, then you DPS through it again, do phase 2 again, and repeat. So, as you can tell, right now, the fight was just absolutely unkillable on PTR. But even on live, it looks like it will be quite unforgiving, as it will have very high requirements for both healing and DPS, while also requiring constant movement to soak, clear, or move out of bed. Overall, it seems like a pretty interesting fight. I think it's going to be extremely challenging, and the phase 2 soaking mechanic reminds me a lot of Star Augur in terms of, the whole melee mechanics. There's a lot that can go wrong. And in general, the raid testing was quite fun this morning. I learned a lot. The guys from Big Dumb Guild were very helpful, and they're very quick learners, which was really interesting to see. And we'll be back to test 2 more bosses tomorrow morning.